Facebook Live with National Review. I am so excited today to talk with Katelyn Beaty, editor-at-large at Christianity Today. Also, she's a freelancer, an author, a writer. She came out with a book last year that we're going to talk about that really inspired me. I just read it in the past couple weeks. So thank you for coming on, Katelyn.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Erica. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I was just telling Katelyn before we jumped on the call that one of the things I've been looking into a lot recently is speaking with people who are leaders and thinkers in the faith and politics community. And I wasn't sure exactly where I ran into Katelyn's name, but when I saw that she was an editor at Christianity Today and had created this blog, Hermeneutics, at Christianity Today, I thought, this is a person I'd really like to speak to. And then I saw your book and I was like, okay, we have to talk. So what I want to talk about today a little bit is the kind of that intersection of faith and politics in the midst of all the polarization in the world and especially the United States right now. We're going to talk about work, feminism, and some of those issues that are really hot topics today. So, Katelyn, thank you so much. To get us started, can you just tell me a little bit about your background, career-wise, how you got to the position that you did at Christianity Today, and what inspired you to start that hermeneutics blog?
Yeah, so I went to Calvin College, a small Christian school in Michigan, and graduated with a communications degree. And it's not entirely clear what I wanted to do, but I knew about Christianity Today through my parents. They had a subscription, and I really appreciated the journalistic excellence that the editors brought to the page. Just very thorough, hard-hitting news about the church and the world, and just had a lot of respect for them. So ended up applying for a copy editor position after graduating and got the position and did that for a couple years. At the time, there were only two full-time female editors on staff. And the other one being Sarah Pulliam-Bailey, who's now with the Washington Post.
Yep. I know of her, seen her name many times.
Yeah, so she came to me one day and just asked casually, would you ever want to start a women's blog? And I was like, instantly, yes, I want to do this. I think a lot of editors at the time felt like because Christianity Today is for leaders in the Christian world, it tended to have kind of a men's magazine feel, but every church most churches have more women than men. So we knew that we needed to start speaking to issues that women might approach in a distinct way or with a different perspective. And so we launched Hermeneutics. It's a terrible / great pun. In 2009, the other one we talked about was missiology, and someone just shut it down right away.
It's hard coming up with names for things. Like, I'm sure you did the same thing with your book. This is such a big deal.
Yeah, we spent hours going back and forth, but landed on Hermeneutics, launched it in 2009, and really almost right away started to see a positive response of women readers coming to us saying, thank you so much for highlighting this issue, or really just seeing more women writing for the print magazine, which was really exciting to see. Just a gender balance in the pages of the magazine itself. And so now Hermeneutics is just rebranded as CT Women, and we have a really devoted following and group of writers. So I'm proud of the work that Sarah and I did with Hermeneutics. After launching that, I went on to serve as the print managing editor for 4 years, and just really had a bird's eye view on everything that the magazine published, and got to work on really exciting cover stories and work with our designers and marketers, and finally decided, after being at CT for about 10 years, decided to step away last fall to try new things. And then I was actually, without expecting it at all, kind of launched into the world of faith and politics. At that time, being asked to speak as an evangelical on the election and Trump and Hillary Clinton, and that's not something that I necessarily planned for, but it's definitely been an interesting season to be an evangelical speaking on issues of faith and politics.
So how did that end up happening? How did you end up getting asked to speak about the election?
Yeah, so pretty much the day, my last day at CT was October 8th, and it was the day that the news hit that the tapes of Donald Trump's comments on sexual assault and sexual harassment. And obviously that was a huge story of the day. And I thought, oh gosh, that's terrible. And also, I'm glad I don't have to figure out how we're going to cover this because it's my last day. And I just
right.
And then just the following week, a lot of mainstream media really wanted to talk about how Christian women were responding to those comments. There were a lot of prominent evangelical female leaders like Beth Moore and Christine Caine, Kay Warren, the wife of Rick Warren at Saddleback. They were all commenting and responding to these comments, and they don't wade into politics
right.
at all.
Yeah.
That was the surprising thing. And so I was on CNN for 5 minutes. I was being asked to write editorials, and not in a way that I would have predicted, but trying to make sense of how these comments were uniquely affecting women, Christian women in particular. I mean, it is the case that a lot of women have experienced either sexual harassment or sexual assault in their lives. And so this is a really personal issue for a lot of people. And I was asked to kind of wade into that in ways that I couldn't have anticipated.
Yeah, it seemed like, I feel like there was actually quite a few people who hadn't really gotten their chance in the media. Not saying that you were looking for that, but there was a lot of people that got a chance to speak in 2016 during this time, because sometimes it was hard for them to find evangelicals that would say anything negative because they were so concerned with ensuring that we elected someone that was a Republican. And I'm not at all trying to blanket evangelicals with that, but there were a lot of people that didn't want to say anything because, afraid of political consequences maybe. And so did you come out as someone that you were like, I have no problem like speaking out against this, and someone had like caught something you said on Twitter and they were like, oh, this is a great representative for evangelicals that are going to stand up against what was said and done?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, I had made a few concerning comments on Twitter and Facebook about Trump during the primary season. But because of my role at Christianity Today, I mean, we serve such a broad range of readers, and as a nonprofit, we're not really allowed to formally endorse or criticize candidates. So we really try to stay above the political fray in a lot of ways. But actually, the day after Trump's leaked comments, Christianity Today did publish an online editorial really criticizing Trump in a very direct way. And I think that kind of gave me permission to do the same. This was the publication I was representing. The reality is, it didn't, I think that editorial probably informed a lot of leaders, but I think if you talk to a lot of people in the pew, there was still this concern of, religious liberty, the topic of abortion, Trump's promise to nominate a pro-life or a conservative Supreme Court justice. I think, I understand to a large extent those issues, especially, next to the opposition, those were the issues that drove support. I think this election was so unique, though, and a little concerning in that you had a candidate who is not a person of faith. I mean, Trump says that he occasionally attends church, but he's not in that world. And he's done certain things that are just really, a lot of evangelicals would have trouble with in terms of questions of character. Yeah. So you have such a unique moment where we're saying we're going to put aside questions of character, which we have always valued in our political leaders. We've always considered to be important. We're going to put those aside because these issues in front of us are so pressing in this particular time, and we don't want to risk what could happen under the opposition, if Hillary Clinton were to win. So, but I think it's left a lot of conservative Christians wondering, well, what does our political witness look like now? And you're going to get a lot of different responses.
Yeah, it was a strange place, I think, for a lot of Christians last year, just because of that character question. A lot of people just wanted to run away, myself included, just from the whole political scene, just because it felt like we had two really bad options. But like at the same time, you felt a responsibility to do your civic duty as well. And like you're saying, I totally understand people's concerns about the pro-life issue and religious liberty. Like those are very important things. And I did not vote for Trump myself. I didn't vote for Hillary either. but I totally get what people were getting at when they did. It makes sense. But to that point, when you mentioned that Christianity today kind of would rise above the political fray, that brings me to the question of where does that faith and politics intersection enter for Christians in their daily lives? Because that's a magazine, you guys have to have editorial standards. But as a normal, everyday Christian that maybe wants to participate in politics but doesn't know how, how do we do that responsibly? There are people that have the mind frame that Christians shouldn't participate in politics. I've heard that. That's not what Jesus would do, I've heard. I also disagree with them and think that there are other ideas. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I am not going to solve the faith and politics dilemma in the next 3 minutes.
Nope.
So if your listeners or viewers are hoping for that, they may be disappointed. So I as a Christian, I believe that our faith has something to say about every realm of life. Our faith is not, it's personal, but it's not private in the sense that it's not just about me and my relationship with God, but faith informs how we go about interacting with our neighbors, interacting with our colleagues, how we do our work well, how we think about social, cultural, political issues of the day. I think as Christians, we want to be informed and engaged and have a posture of engaging the world rather than retreating from the world. So that's where I would start. And I think that the Christian tradition supports that approach. In terms of politics specifically, I think that we as Christians have a call to serve the common good. Now, the common good, that's a big term, and we have to ask, well, what's good and what's common? Who is part of the polis? Who's part of the common community? So those are terms that we have to define. But in general, we want to interact politically in a way that serves our neighbors and promotes human flourishing. So that informs my pro-life position. I believe that I am called to defend vulnerable life, and unborn life is vulnerable life. And so that's going to inform how I vote and how I engage on specific in specific conversations. And by the way, vote meaning not just every 4 years, who do I tick on the box for president, but also local and state politics. Are there organizations in my community that I support? Would I be willing to go to a protest? Would I be willing to meet with my congressman? So I think we have this very limited and narrow vision of political engagement right now that's just, every 4 years, maybe every 2 years, I tick a box, but being a political person is about so much more than that. So,
right. Yeah, go ahead.
So, caring for vulnerable life, that also informs, and I don't know if this is going to ruffle some feathers, but that also informs how I think about the current refugee crisis and how our specific policies treat refugees and people seeking shelter in our country. We know that many refugees in the Middle East are fleeing their home. They don't want to leave their homes, but they're fleeing because of violence and persecution. Are we creating policies that protect them in their vulnerable state. So that actually gets me to another important point, which is I think it's really important for Christians to remember that neither political party, neither of the two major parties in the United States has the final say on morality. And so I think in some sense, Christians have to be willing to rise above the division and the polarization between the two parties and say, I'm willing to be, you're red, you're blue, I'm purple. I'm not just going to repeat the talking points of either political party, but my faith actually compels me to transcend those divides for the sake of the common good and for the sake of promoting human flourishing.
Yeah, I had written down a quote that you had in the piece that you wrote for Vox, which was almost exactly what you just said, which is, I believe that the Christian faith is strongest when it transcends the talking points of Republicans and Democrats alike. So I think that I loved that line. It was so good. And then in another piece that you wrote on Inauguration Day, another line that I really pulled out that I really liked, you wrote, "For Christians of all political stripes, the day is simply a new day to practice the radical ordinariness of following Christ." What did it mean to you to write that sentence and to write that piece on Inauguration Day? What were you thinking?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of a big piece to take on. Inauguration Day, you're an evangelical, but you're not necessarily like really excited on Inauguration Day about necessarily who is being elected. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I think, I have found myself really emotionally engaged in our current political moment, and sometimes feeling fear or discouragement, and just seeing myself really reacting very strongly to different things that are happening, different policy proposals, different nominations. And so I think on Inauguration Day, it was really important, no matter how Christians were feeling. I mean, some Christians were happy and celebrating, and others were afraid or mourning. But wherever we landed on the emotional spectrum, remembering that no political leader or party or system has more power than God himself. God is the author of history. God is sovereign over human affairs. And what he calls us to do, we may feel disempowered, like, what can I do to change things? But actually, the most powerful force in the world is God's love manifest and expressed through his people, through his church. And just remembering that eternal perspective as a Christian, I know that not all of your listeners or viewers share that perspective, but as a Christian, I think that was really important for me and for others to remember that no political ruler or leader is more powerful. Yeah,
nobody should be too excited or too upset, no matter who wins, really.
Yes.
Because it's not the most important thing, and it certainly doesn't determine our fate in the long term. So I totally get that. Hold on a second. I just lost track of my questions. Okay, here we go. How do you think that Christians can best be a light and lead in the political space? I recently interviewed Russell Moore on this podcast, and I love him as a leader in this space. Is there anyone that you see doing it well that you would advise people to look towards in that aspect?
Yeah, well, I think that we have to remember that there are Christians in politics. There are Christian congressmen and people who are advocating or campaigning in D.C. It's not like the church is over here and the politicians are over here.
Right.
So when Christians are involved in politics, I think one of the things that they can do is to treat the people across the aisle with dignity and respect and charity. Now, that does not mean, we're all going to sit around singing Kumbaya. and I think strong disagreement is actually really important for our political process. But doing so, engaging in disagreement and debate in a way that remembers and honors the humanity of the person that you are debating or engaging. They are an image bearer. They bear the image of God. And as Christians, we're called to love our ideological enemy. And that's really hard because social media, I think, disincentivizes remembering each other's humanity. It's very disembodied. We don't have to necessarily ever see the person that we're debating, but really disagreeing and debating in ways that honor the humanity of the other person is really important. I think especially at this moment when we're so quick to demonize, after a national tragedy, after a shooting, our instinct is to blame or to point the finger, well, the other side was responsible for this in some way. Is there a space where we can all come together and mourn together and remember our commonality? So that's one thing that Christians can do. I also think it's really important for everyday Christians to be in spaces, ideally in the local church, where they're interacting with people who they disagree with. So we're not all in our little silos, but we are willing to be in relationship with the people we disagree with, and taking the time to understand where they're coming from, what is the experience that they bring to the table, or how do they read scriptures in a way that leads them to come to this conclusion. None of our churches should be like all red or all blue. That's how it tends to happen. But if we can have purple churches, I think we'll be healthier churches.
Yeah,
So
I like that idea a lot. I have to say, yesterday, after the shooting yesterday, yes, there was the normal stuff that happened online afterwards, but it was nice to see that I don't think I saw any politician go, well, there was one, but I don't think I saw most politicians go out there and try to do any blaming or really even try to talk about gun control. Not that that's not a valid subject, but like in the aftermath of something like that, it's kind of like hold off 24 hours to start the policy discussion. And I think it was very encouraging. Like there was a photo of the Democrat team praying for the Republicans just after it happened. And, Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders, I think they both were on the House floor saying very nice, things, nothing negative. And that's not really like the Christian portion of this conversation, but I just have to say it was encouraging that it was not a big negative blowout afterwards yesterday. So, anyways, that being said, let's switch to your book, which it's called A Woman's Place. Now, I would not do a great job summing it up. So you sum it up for us. What was your goal in writing the book, and where did you get the idea?
Yeah. So in Christian circles, I tend to think that work is not a topic that we talk about very much. I think we have this, people call it the Sunday to Monday gap, where we think about Sunday being our day that we're Christians, but we don't always have a great framework for understanding what it means to be a person of faith throughout the week, in our daily work, at the office, at the home, wherever we work. And so I really wanted to integrate those two things. What does it mean to be a person of faith if you're a barista, if you're an educator, if you're a librarian, if you're a police officer, what does it mean to honor God and serve the common good in those different spaces? I think, so that's a big conversation that I think Christians are having and need to continue having. I think for women in particular in the church, there can often be conversations or narratives or messages that really discourage women from working outside the home. And so I wanted to look at those messages. Where are they coming from? Why do a lot of people really believe that women shouldn't work outside the home, or shouldn't work outside the home if they have young children at home? That's really where the tension is. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to examine, where does that belief come from? Is it biblical? And are there ways that churches and Christian communities can affirm women who are making many different choices, but trying to honor God and love their family well in the midst of it. And I think that there's not one model for that. I think there are women who stay home with their children when they're really young and are super fulfilled and grateful for that experience and really feel like that's where God has placed them. And there are other women who either work full-time outside the home with the young children at home or work out a part-time situation, and that they also are trying to honor God and love their family and pursue God's call on their life. And I think there's a way that Christian communities can affirm both women as they wrestle through those questions and that discernment. Because I really do think it all comes down to each family discerning what is best for their family, and there's not one size fits all.
And it sounded like in the book that you kind of had a shift in your thinking. Maybe you had been thinking when you were younger that maybe staying at home mom was the way to go. And then as time went on and you're learning and growing and thinking, like, you kind of had this epiphany, not necessarily that, but this idea about what is God's calling on a woman's life. It doesn't necessarily have to be being a stay-at-home mom, although it may be. And also you talk about how there's a different kind of work, which is at home. I think you write about was it your grandmother that was a stay-at-home, or a mom that stayed at home, but she had all kinds of stuff going on. So how has your thinking changed over the years on this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I opened the book by sharing this really difficult personal story, which was that when I was 28, so many years ago, I won't name how many years, earlier in my life, I was engaged to be married and really thought that my life would kind of proceed in a very neat fashion from that. So, I would get married and I would maybe work for a couple more years, but then eventually I would step away from work as we had children, and maybe I would return to work outside the home later on in life, but this is how it was going to go. And then just through a series of events, we ended up, my fiance at the time and I ended up breaking off the engagement. And obviously that was really hard. But in the midst of that, and by the way, the day that we broke off the engagement was the day that I was offered the managing editor position at Christianity Today, which was just such odd, strange timing. But
yeah, it's like quite a day you had there.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeez.
So all of that really started it led to a lot of churning around my identity. I think women specifically, we draw a lot of our identity from relationships and from family. And I wanted to say, look, I'm single. I don't have children. I love my work. I believe that, I am honoring God and serving others through my work. Is there a place for me? Is there a narrative where we can say that's just as valid a path, for honoring God as being at home with young children? And I do think that a lot of single women, or just a lot of professionally oriented women, feel a little displaced in the local church. And I wanted to address that and make space for women who maybe found themselves in a similar situation as me.
I totally related to some of the stuff that you wrote about that because I remember being single. I got married when I was 31, so I wasn't like super young, but I just remember feeling that kind of weird outcast feeling. And also I remember so my little story to go along with this is that when I was 18, 19, 20, I was like, I don't really care about career. I really just want to get married and have kids. Like, that's my thing that I want to do. And then all of a sudden I was like, well, I'm 24 and I don't have anyone to marry. So what do? I guess I'm going to have a career. I mean, that's how I ended up having a career, because I couldn't, you can't force yourself to get married. I mean, I guess you could, but it wasn't happening for me. And I realized, okay, I have to refocus what I thought my life was going to look like, because I always thought I'm going to get married when I'm like 22. I'm going to meet somebody in college, and it's, didn't happen. And so I always say I'm thankful for that, because I have had an awesome career. Like, I've loved all the work that I've been able to do. I would have never gone to Washington, D.C., work on Capitol Hill, all these things. But it is true that, that sometimes that you have to find, you need resources, you need a place to go, especially in the church. And it does seem like there's something missing there. Someone even commented, I had written something about your book on my Facebook page, and someone I know who's a single mom who's like in her 30s, she was like, yeah, I feel like there's nothing for me. She's like, everything is for moms is scheduled during the day, or the small group is like early in the evening. Like, there's no resource for me. So I guess I'm not sure what I'm getting at with the question here, but you do talk about that. You talk about that, the fact that there aren't a lot of spaces that the church is making for women, for professional women. That aren't the stay-at-home moms. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, the story that you just shared from the single mom, I've heard anecdotes like that so much. So I know that it's something bigger than just my experience. Like, I think this is a phenomenon that we really need to address. And so really, honestly, I think in large part, it's churches just catching up with the reality that most women do work in some capacity outside the home. Like, whether it's full-time or part-time, that is the cultural shift. And whether you think that cultural shift is good or bad or a mixed bag, the reality is most women are spending some time outside the home working or invested in their professional life. And so we can either say, well, that's not what we would prefer, and so we're really going to focus on the full-time stay-at-home moms, or we could say, look, are there resources that we can provide to many women across the life spectrum, making different life choices that meets them where they are? Is this a gospel issue? I don't think it is. And so it could be as simple as, having Bible studies or small groups at different times of the week, having them on Saturday afternoon when women who work full-time during the week could actually attend. It's things like pastors highlighting professional woman who works full-time from the pulpit, saying, I want to honor this person for the work that they're doing in our community. I think in some measure it's having women participate in the leadership of the church. And that doesn't necessarily mean senior pastor or elder. I know there are many Christian traditions that would not support that, but I think every church can benefit from incorporating women's voices and experiences in their common life. And then beyond that, I think just making sure that, we talk about the mommy wars and the way that women can sometimes either feel judged by other women or judge other women for the choices that they're making. And there's this whole back and forth thing about how you're doing your parenting. And just making sure that the church, the local church, is not feeding that, that this is a place where we're coming together and saying what we have in common far transcends whatever choices our families are making regarding parenting. And we want to be a place of support and not judgment, because that judgment unfortunately, it really can turn some women away from the local church, and that's a loss.
Where do you think this, I have seen a lot of efforts as of late to kind of stop the mommy wars and just respect everyone's personal decisions. I think that's gotten a little better. It's less accepted to judge for certain things, everything from breastfeeding to daycare. But where do you think or maybe you don't know, but that initial judgment of daycare specifically, like having your child be in daycare and working full time and making that choice. Obviously, there are plenty of people that don't have the luxury of making that choice, but there are some that do, and I'm one of them. When it comes down to it, I could be a stay-at-home mom, but I enjoy my job. Like you write about in the book, I feel very called to what I do. I feel that God has given me a gift in some of my professional work. And so I'm just wondering where that started, that whole thing about like, if you're dumping your kid in daycare, you're not taking care of them. I don't know if I'm not blaming the church for that by any means. That may just be a larger cultural thing that popped up like in the 50s. But you've done a lot of research on this, so I don't know if that's something that you've looked at.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what women are responding to regarding the mommy wars is just the fact that women have so many more choices in terms of their work and their family life than they did 50 or 100 years ago. And so because there are more choices, you're going to have a variety of choices represented among any set of women. And then within that, I think there's some insecurity. Like the more choices we have, the more insecure we feel that we are doing the right thing, that we are making the right choice. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's worth noting that what we're talking about really matters. Like we're talking about our children and their flourishing and caring for them well. And so we feel like there's a lot at stake in terms of the decisions that we are making. I do think that some of the mommy wars have been fueled by mainstream feminism and the push within second wave feminism in the 60s and 70s to say to women, like, you shouldn't be at home. Being at home is weak, or you're not intelligent if you're at home, or you're giving up on the rights that we've worked so hard for. So I think that wave of feminism really pushed women outside the home. And there were reasons for that. And I think as a backlash or a response to that movement, more traditional communities have really doubled down on the importance of honoring stay-at-home moms. So I think that we're caught up in a cultural shift and cultural divides. I mean, I think it really does arise out of a culture war. I think that most local churches, though, have to find a way to transcend that, to both honor the stay-at-home mom, to say you are doing good and valuable work, whether or not you're getting paid, whether or not people see this work. The work that you are doing of raising your children is supremely valuable, and you should be honored and respected in that work. And then also to say to the woman like you, who feels called to work outside the home, it's not just about economics, it's a real sense of fulfillment and enjoyment and calling, to say you are doing what's best for you and your family at this time. The work that you're doing outside the home really matters. It really matters for your neighbors, for the world of journalism, for the world of writing and reporting. And so I think, ideally there is a church out there that can say both of those things totally honestly. And that's what I'm hoping that my book helps churches do a little bit better.
Right. And it's, I was talking about this with my Bible study this week, and one of the girls was like, yeah, I'm not called to be a stay-at-home mom. I can tell you that right now. I'm called to work in the world of education. And she said it so confidently. And I was like, wow, like I could have that confidence too about my choices. I don't have to feel a constant tension and guilt. Well, tension, I guess you're always going to have that if you're a mom, but in the mom guilt is always going to be there in some sense. But I was telling you earlier that just that part of your book and just thinking about that really had given me just like had really helped me in my thought process on why I do what I do and what that is. And then to the point about, God's calling on our lives, a lot of work is just necessity, but there are many people that do feel a real calling. And so I think, what I would say to people about that is like that you just need to be that's just your encouragement to be like in communion with God, to make sure you're hearing him clearly if you feel confused. I think that's a really important part of it. So we're getting close to the end here. I want to ask you a couple more questions. So, Katelyn, you're a very successful professional woman, obviously. And I'm sure there are many women, especially young women, who are trying to figure out what they want to do with their careers and their lives that would love to do something like what you've done. Like you've moved up the ranks of this awesome magazine and now you've written a book. What are some things that have contributed to your success? And what is your mentality on what you want to do in the future? Do you have anything that you can look to and say, okay, I can point to this and say, here's what got me where I am?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, that's a great question, Erica. And I get that question a lot. Like, what would you say to your younger self?
Always the question.
You know, and I don't want to downplay the hard work that I put in and the skill sets that I bring to my work. I also think in some ways it was being at the right place at the right time. I will say early on in my work at CT, at Christianity Today, I really did not care about the copy editing. I was good at it. I could do it. But I had this sense of, I really just have to do the work. You know, it's not about whether I necessarily enjoy it or feel fulfilled in it or whether even my colleagues think it's a big deal. I just have to do the work. And I think a lot of young people graduating from college right now, early on in their career, feel like I have to find the one thing that brings me the most fulfillment. I have to find my dream job. And I kind of want to say, you know, some people get to do that, but most of us really just have to put in the work and find ways to enjoy the work that's before us rather than jumping from thing to thing to find the perfect job. So that's one thing I would say, like almost just put your nose down to the grindstone and do the work, which is not really encouraging or motivational, but it's what I found from my experience. This is something that comes up a lot, and so many other people talk about this. It was really important to me to find a boss, a supervisor who really believed in me and who was supportive and who I had regular conversation with, who was asking, you know, what is your goal for the next 5 years? How can we grow and develop you in your work here? That was really key. And he, you know, I think there is something to be said about finding mentors and supervisors who are women. If you are a woman, I do think that matters, but he's a man and that wasn't an issue. He was supportive of me and really believed in my gifting. And so that was key. I did, though, I think because Christianity Today at the time just was majority men, you know, it was mostly male editors. I really did long for a female mentor. I really longed for a woman I could go to who was 20 or 30 years into her career to ask questions about, you know, workflow, work-life balance, negotiating pay, dealing with conflict. I just wanted a woman I could confide in, and I didn't necessarily have that. I think that a lot of organizations and companies are getting better at that. I just think there are more women in leadership. There's more of an effort to promote women in leadership. But if you can find someone who is a woman who has experienced a lot of the things that you are experiencing, who you can go to with questions and advice, I think that can be really key. Even if the woman isn't at your specific workplace, just another professional woman who's farther into her career, that can be really enlightening and encouraging. Just to know, like, I'm not alone in these unique issues that I'm dealing with as a working woman.
Yeah, I'm kind of on a hunt for someone like that right now. Not really sure how to find them, but mentors are very, very helpful. I mean, they can answer so many questions for you and just, provide advice that's extremely helpful. So I totally agree with that. So do you have anyone that's kind of a lame question, I guess, but I should have prepared you for it. Do you have any role models or people that you really admire that really inspire you in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is more on the theological end, but there's a writer and Anglican Episcopal priest. She was one of the first women ordained in the Episcopal Church, named Flemming Rutledge, which is kind of a hard name, but she is in her 70s. She keeps writing. She has the most amazing preaching style, and I got to meet her when I was a student at Calvin, and her writing, her depth of thinking on the Christian story has really profoundly shaped me. And I think, again, with her, it really mattered that she's a woman, that I could identify with her in some way and look up to her as a young woman, looking at a woman who has broken some glass ceilings and is super sharp, great writer and communicator. In terms of like the current world of journalism, I mean, Sarah Pulliam-Bailey is at the Washington Post now. I think Acts of Faith does a really great job of highlighting religion stories. Emma Green at The Atlantic, every time I read something from Emma, I'm like, I wanted to write that, and she was just on top of it like 2 days before me.
Oh, man.
Like, she's just super sharp, understands the nuances of the Christian world really, really well. Very solid reporting and fact-checking. So I would love to be like Emma, even though she's like 10 years younger than me.
Well, that's good. I do recognize her name, but I will, next time I'm actually going to really click through and read when I see her stuff, because, well, sometimes it's just so hard to decide what to spend your precious moments on when everything's coming at you on Twitter and you're like, should I actually read this or should I just pass? So, but I will definitely read her next time I come across her stuff now. So awesome. Well, those are great answers. Okay, last question. Do you have any favorite regular reads on a daily basis, and also any podcasts? If you're a podcast person, I am, and so I love hearing what people like to listen to on podcast.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the podcast. So and this is such a like light and bubbly one, but I do like Pop Culture Happy Hour from NPR. I think Invisibilia, which I think just started its second or third season, is really great. We've established that I am not a mom, but I find The Longest Shortest Time really interesting, looking at everything from a more kind of cultural, sociological perspective. I think Krista Tippett at On Being has some really fascinating people that she interviews and is a great interviewer. So those would be some of the podcasts. And then I would be remiss not to mention Christianity Today's podcast, which I was on for about a year, called Quick to Listen. And it's a weekly show that just, features guests talking about issues of the day from a Christian perspective, and is very timely and has just had some really interesting people on. So
all good stuff. Yeah, I've got some there that I need to try, and I try them all. Like, I'm such a junkie.
In terms of daily reading, I'm not wed to a particular website. I don't have my one website that I get all my news from. Honestly, I get a lot of my news. I start with social media, so I go onto Twitter and Facebook and see what people are talking about, and then if there's something that a lot of people in my feed are recommending or posting about, that's what I'll typically read. So
I do that too.
I think that's becoming more and more standard.
Yeah, I agree. It's so hard to just, I guess you could have an RSS feed, but I guess Twitter's kind of an RSS feed, because Twitter is it's not necessarily like a normal person thing so much anymore. It's more of a journalist type of tool, in my opinion. I see it more, it's very important in the journalistic and like media community, but not so much for like the everyday person who's now moved on to Snapchat. So
I gave up Snapchat a long time ago because I'm like too old. I'm like, I don't understand why this is fun.
Yeah, I did Snapchat for about 6 months, and then they started doing Instagram stories, and I was like, I can't do both. I can't look at Snapchat anymore. So I deleted it off my phone and no longer am a Snapchatter. So.
Yeah, me too.
Anyways, well, okay, Katelyn, thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it. We're going to put the link to the book and all the things that we talked about in the notes when we're done. And join us next week for another interview on Facebook Live. See you later.